Ladies and gentlemen, we should almost name the Sports Report today the Wrestling Show, because it is a who's who of wrestling characters that are on the show here. And if you didn't think we could top Odyssey Pro Wrestling's the Cumbrian Outlaw Rick Marcus and the Natural Born Fighter R.P. Davis and the general manager of Odyssey Pro Wrestling Ethan Edwards, I think we found somebody that's an asset, and he's going to be an asset to any professional wrestling company, because in a short amount of time, he has established himself as one of the marquee names that you are going to watch for years and years to come. And I look at him as a cross between a Cesaro and a Bret Hart and even a little bit of a Seth Rollins and what he can do in the ring. And he's somebody that you're going to keep an eye on. He's had a big 2020. He's going to have an even bigger 2021. And without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show here on Sported Area, the Stephen Crow. My friend, welcome aboard.
Wow, what an intro. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really excited to be here.
We're happy to have you. And after watching your last match last year, I wanted to come up with a different intro. And I'm sure you've listened to a number of these shows over the past several weeks. And I think that most people now listen to the Sports Report on Sportinarium, not just for me to talk to a number of these different wrestlers that we've had, including our guest that just came on the show, but more or less for the intros. So I always feel like there's more and more pressure each time we top these intros that we've done the past several months.
Well, I think you're going to struggle to top that one. That was unreal.
Well, I'm going to try to do it because we have a lot to talk about with you, and we're looking forward to the future for you when it comes to all the great things that you are going to do in professional wrestling. And Stephen, it's a tremendous honor to have you here on the Sports Report and talk about all the great things that you've done and your journey into professional wrestling, especially as one of the marquee names here in the UK. And Stephen, I wanted to ask you, for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, and describe your wrestling style for our worldwide audience that isn't quite familiar with the asset, Stephen Cross.
Yeah, so my style, I would say it's a technical style, really, quite ground-based. It's definitely quite physical, a lot of striking involved. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said Bret Hart was heavily inspired by Bret Hart. I love Steve Austin, your Benoits and your Angles and people like that, massive inspirations of mine. So obviously that was always the style I wanted to kind of craft, like a technical style. And then as I was training and learning, I realised how much I actually enjoyed the striking side of things. So then I introduced a lot more of that into my game. So it's like, with working as heel so often as well, it's basically like a mixture of being able to out wrestle people and also beat people up, to put it simply.
Well, you definitely are going to beat a lot of people up, and you've definitely beat a lot of people up so far in your career. And I want to talk about that when it comes to your wrestling style. You rattled off a number of different names. Some of them have been the best for our generation and maybe the best all time when it comes to technical wrestling. When you mentioned the likes of a Kurt Angle, you mentioned the likes of a Bret the Hitman Hart, or even a Stone Cold Steve Austin before he broke his neck against Owen Hart in SummerSlam of '97. Yeah. And that's a different style than, let's say, your average American brawler of, let's say, an Undertaker or a Rock, or even to an extent a different type of style versus, let's say, a Kenny Omega, who's popular now, obviously, is the AEW champion, and also, let's say, more or less even different than, let's say, a Ric Flair style of the past. So that style that you incorporate is very different. It's very physical. I mean, how do you train for that type of wrestling versus, let's say, somebody that's going to just be accustomed to punch and brawl, or punch and go back and forth, or punch and clothesline, or let's say take a lot of bumps in the ring? They're not going to get too much offense until they make that big comeback. I mean, talk to me about your training style versus, let's say, another wrestler's style.
I think working mainly as a heel, working as a bad guy, actually lends itself into, you'll always get a part of the match where you're beating the opponent down, and you want, obviously, your babyface to to be gaining sympathy from the crowd. So like when you say, when they make the big comeback, the crowd are up for it. So with being a heel, you always get that opportunity in a match where you're in control and you're beating the opponent down. So with working so much on striking and being physical, that automatically lends itself into that. And it was just, it was a part that the more I trained, the more I enjoyed doing. I even enjoy people the other way around when it's physical both ways. I really love that. Provided everyone's safe and everything, the more physical, the better for me.
I'm sure that when wrestlers get in the ring with you, that they know that they are going to take some punishment. That's almost like when you wrestle, let's say, a Bobby Lashley or a Brock Lesnar, or even back in the day, a Ken Shamrock, where you know that when you're going to get into the ring for 10 or 15 minutes, that's going to be a lot of punishment. So you're going to have to, quote unquote, work very stiff, nonetheless, for the term. But I'm also curious about this because you said something interesting. I want to go back to that, especially for our worldwide audience listening here in Sportinarium that may not be quite familiar with that. And you work as a heel, and obviously as a heel, I think you get to explore more of what you want to do in the ring versus as a face. Sometimes you see a face in the ring and the face has to take a lot of that punishment. The face has to work to get that crowd reaction, to get the crowd behind them. And we've talked with obviously a number of wrestlers over the past several months here on the show. And I think wrestlers by and large, sometimes they actually want to work as heels because as a heel, it allows you to do a couple of different things. It allows you to explore your character. It also allows you to work on what you can do in the ring and improve your craft. I mean, talk to me about some of your thoughts on that and if that's something that you feel where as a heel, you get to explore your character a little bit more. You get to be able to improve your craft in the ring. And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, everybody's different, obviously, but to me personally, it feels easier to be a heel. It feels easier to be nasty and to be horrible and to mouth off to the crowd and stuff. I'm not overly comfortable yet whenever I'm training, playing a role of a babyface, of trying to gain sympathy off people, or how, like, I can obviously sell, but it's completely different selling as a babyface and gaining the crowd sympathy and making the crowd want to see you beat up this other person. Whereas for me, I find it quite easy to make the crowd see me get beat up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's very few wrestlers that I think can do both. I mean, Chris Jericho has been an example of somebody that can do both and do it very well. Kurt Angle, who you brought up when it came to your wrestling style, he's somebody that's been able to do well at both. You want to throw in a Jon Moxley, I could go with that, or a Kenny Omega, but it's very few guys that can really pull that off. I mean, biggest example of that was Sting, when Sting turned heel in WCW for the first time in 10 years, or even when he was a heel in TNA, it just wasn't the same. I mean, some guys are wrestlers as faces. I mean, Goldberg's another example. I mean, Goldberg essentially was a heel one time in his career and it was like awkward. I think that it's very hard to be able to go back and forth and do both. So I could certainly see why that's the case for you. And then also for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, I mean, what got you into wrestling?
Well, I was a massive fan as a kid. Grew up on Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania. Was obsessed with Hulk Hogan. Anything to do with Hulk Hogan. I remember my parents digressed slightly. My mum took us to shop here, Toys R Us. I was like, oh, you can have a new wrestling figure. I already had 2 Hulk Hogan ones, and then my brother was fuming when I came home. Rather than with someone different, I bought a 3rd Hulk Hogan figure. Yeah, so grew up on Hulk Hogan. Then after him, it was Bret Hart. Once Hogan left the WWF and Bret Hart was a champion, I was obsessed with Bret Hart. It was him more than anyone. He's like my number 1 of all time. So watching him hold the title and the matches he used to have and everything, that was when I first started thinking, I want to do this. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do, really, to be honest. There was always the dream I wanted to play for Manchester United, but I'm rubbish at soccer. So that was never going to happen. And then I stopped watching for a couple of years and then got back into it in the late Attitude Era, which obviously when Austin was on top. I was already an Austin fan from WCW and then from his early WWF days. So then that was when I was just convinced that it was definitely something I wanted to do. And funny story, actually, when we were in our last year of high school, the school I went to actually started trialing careers advice. and only 4 or 5 of us got sent. To be brutally honest, I think it was some of the problem kids got sent there. That's why I got sent. But yeah, they actually said, what would you like to do as a career? And I said, professional wrestler. And they basically laughed at me and was like, well, that's not going to happen. So I argued. I was like, why isn't it? They said, it's not. Just pick something else. And I thought, this isn't a very good career's advice, is it? They could have at least said, well, chances are that might not happen. Why don't you have a backup plan? But they were just like, no, that's not going to happen. Pick something else. Something I've always wanted to be honest.
It's funny you said that, because I remember as a kid, I would always sort of like announce myself playing sports in the street growing up in Brooklyn. I would always almost rattle off every little play that would go on. And you would never think about, hey, I'm going to grow up and be a broadcaster, or hey, I'm going to grow up and be an athlete. I mean, it was just, you were just doing it just for fun. And then the time came when you were in high school, it was like, okay, you have to start thinking about what you want to do when you grow up, or quote unquote. And it was like, I never really, I guess you could say, I maybe had the same experience, because I never really knew what I was ever going to be, really. It was always like, okay, well, I liked accounting, I liked government. I mean, I did go into politics, I guess, but I didn't have a formal like degree in that. So, I mean, I did go into that. I had some luck in that. I mean, so I guess you could say that. But when it comes to Bret Hart, I mean, that's pretty much my similar experience. In fact, the asset Stephen Cross, one of the things I'm most angry about to this day is I can't find my Bret the Hitman Hart poster. As a kid growing up, I actually used to have in my closet hanging up, I used to have a Bret the Hitman Hart poster. In fact, the poster was actually the picture of him after he beat the then 1-2-3 Kid for the WWF title on Monday Night Raw. This has to be about, I want to say, July of 1994. And in fact, somewhere, I know I have it still. I have it in my basement, and I haven't looked at it probably in about 10 or 15 years since I'm in college. But I actually have the WWF magazine of Bret Hart after he won the WWF title. So I have a bunch of those old magazines with Bret the Hitman Hart, and he was really one of my favorite all-time wrestlers still to this day. I remember growing up and practicing backyard wrestling, quote unquote. I learned all of Bret Hart's moves. I learned the side Russian leg sweep. I learned the DDT the way he did it, the sharpshooter. I learned all those moves that he did. And then Stone Cold with the Attitude Era, I mean, that was hallmark of high school. I mean, so I could certainly see why you went on to do all the great things that you've done as a professional wrestler. And then speaking of being a professional wrestler, and speaking of some things that you've learned from people that I know have helped you out into where you're going to have bigger and better things coming up, you've done some work at Future Shock Wrestling. And Future Shock Pro Wrestling is a company that we have talked about quite a bit on the show over the past several weeks with a who's who of people. So talk about Future Shock Pro Wrestling and why that has been important in your journey so far.
Well, as soon as I decided properly that I wanted to start training, it was the first place. First of all, I'm from a place called Chester, which is in the northwest of England. So it's a small city, so the professional wrestling schools, there's not really that kind of thing around here. So you're looking at places like Liverpool or Manchester is your closest place. So when I was researching that I wanted to train, I looked at those places, and it was always Future Shock that stood out to me. So then I became a fan of their shows from afar. And then even when I didn't actually start training for years, it was always the place I thought, I'm hanging my hat there. That's where I want to go. So I dipped my toe in training a little bit in 2016, went 2 or 3 times, and then started properly training in 2017. And that's when it was the old Future Shock Wrestling Academy. And it was just an obvious place to go because there's so many people have come through there. So many people that have got as high as WWE or are in NXT UK right now. So it's just a no-brainer that, you're going to get a good wrestling education there. So I've always loved Future Shock, and then it's obviously things happened, and the school at the time got taken away from the Future Shock name. But then I think last year or the year before, Future Shock opened their performance centre, which is where I train now, and I just can't speak highly enough of the training there, honestly.
How excited are you to be able to get back there, especially in the fact that we've had COVID and the pandemic has hurt so many people, especially in the wrestling scene in the UK. And obviously, we're so happy for everybody that's been able to finally now be able to get back into training and get back into those gyms, because it's been such a long time. I mean, how ready and excited are you to be able to get back and go there to the Performance Center?
Oh, I can't wait. I should actually be getting back there this week, actually. I can't wait to get back there. I mean, when after the first lockdown last year, 6 months or so without wrestling, plus our old place closed, I was really, really nervous about going back. You obviously have all those silly doubts of, I've forgotten everything. I don't know how to do anything. I won't even be able to do an arm drag or lock up. But having gone there last year and the 6 months or so that we were training there for the UK's second lockdown, I'm a lot more comfortable about going back this time. Like I've still got the whole whole, oh, I won't remember a thing attitude, but this time I don't actually care. I just can't wait to get back there. I think that's a testament to the atmosphere there, to be honest, to the trainer, Sam Bailey, and the atmosphere he creates, and just the people there as well. It's just such a good place to train. I just can't wait to get back there.
Absolutely. And we can't wait to see you back in the ring, my friend, and see all the great things that you're going to do. And that is why they call you the Asset Stephen Cross, as we are here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show here on Sportinarium, talking all things related to the wrestling career of the Asset Stephen Cross. And the Asset Stephen Cross has quickly established himself as one of the premier names in the wrestling business here in the UK. He is well on his way to bigger and better things, especially here in 2021, as we are getting ready to see wrestling return. As I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and we're talking all things related to the career of the Asset Stephen Cross. And he's already established himself in a very short amount of time as somebody that's going to be one of the best technical wrestlers in the business. Bret Hart, Stone Cold, Kurt Angle, Cesaro, Kenny Omega, you name him, move on over. The Asset Stephen Cross is coming your way. And you said something else interesting, the Asset Stephen Cross, that I want to talk about, because this is something we've talked about with a number of the different wrestlers who've come on the show here over the past few months. And the fact that you haven't gotten in the ring, you haven't taken those bumps. And being a wrestler is different than, let's say, being a football player or being a basketball player, where you can pick up the ball in 6 months and 7 months or a year later and it all comes to you. I mean, we saw Michael Jordan come in and out of the NBA a few different times and it was like he never left. But being a professional wrestler, I think, is different, because you get used to that punishment each and every night. You get used to knowing the fact that you have to take bumps. You have to bump a certain way. Being a professional wrestler is an art. And that's why I've always considered it a sport, in the fact that on what you guys have to do to be able to get yourself in the condition, and also remember all the different things that you have to do. I mean, it's really an art more or less than a sport. So I think it's a lot different than some of these other sports or these other athletes. And listen, hey, they could be gone for 6 months or 7 months, like I said, or even a year, and they could come back and it's like nothing. I mean, is that something that's really important that you're really thinking about here, in the fact that you want to get into the ring as soon as possible? Because you went a year without not having a match. I mean, think about it. Guys usually have in the WWE 100, 150 matches a year now, maybe even 200, depending on how many nights they work. And even at the indie level, you're still working probably 50 to 70 matches a year, maybe even a little more, depending on how far you want to travel. And then this year, you and many others haven't wrestled any matches. I mean, is that something that you've thought about at all?
Oh, yeah, for definite. I mean, I'm anxious to get back in there as well. There's only one way you can get in ring shape, and that's by being in there. I mean, you can do all the cardio you want, lifting, body weight exercising, whatever, and that can obviously give you a base and prepare you to a point. But there's no way you're going to get match ready other than having matches. It's completely different kind of fitness. I mean, I don't think there's any way to replicate, obviously, running back and forth for however many minutes, having to lift somebody lifting you, being on the floor, having to get back up, catch someone in the air, all these different things. There's only one way you can be ready for those, and that's by doing it. As you say, it's been the whole year without a match. So
I actually think in one sense, you might actually be better off, because I was listening to Tommy Dreamer talk after his match that he had with Rich Swann for the Impact Wrestling title a couple of months ago. And he said something interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on it, because he had said that during the match, he was kind of used to, at some point, the fans kind of rallying him to come back. And that as a wrestler, he had wrestled for so long in front of fans, and that a lot of what he does in the ring, or a lot of what he conditions himself for, is that fan reaction to kind of give him that second win, to give him that adrenaline. And in some ways, in some shape or form, it's a lot harder to wrestle in front of no fans than people realize. And I was even listening to Chris Jericho talk about this when Stone Cold was interviewing him after WrestleMania, and he was saying how tough it was to be able to wrestle at the very beginning of the pandemic without any fans, because you feed off the crowd. You have somebody to feed off. You have that adrenaline rush, because I don't think people realize, being in that 10 to 12 minutes for an average match, how difficult that is, and how much adrenaline runs through you to be able to get through that match. I mean, in one sense, if I were to tell you that maybe you were better off because when you come back later this year, you're going to be wrestling in front of fans. Even if it's 100 fans or 200 fans, you still can feed off a crowd and kind of help you get through that match because, again, you haven't done it in so long. I mean, talk to me about your thoughts on all that.
I'd completely agree with you, to be honest, yeah. Like you've said, we've not had shows behind closed doors or anything where we've had to wrestle in an empty room. So, and I can imagine it's an even bigger thing for those guys at the top, the crowds they're working in front of and the size of them. It must have been such an adjustment to then go to just performing in front of a few cameras. And I think from what I've seen, people can moan about it. And obviously, sure, we've all moaned about the quality of the TV or whatever at some point, but you've got to give them credit for being able to go out and have these matches as if they're wrestling in front of a full arena. As you say, it must be so difficult for them to get used to. And I think you're right that in some ways we're better off that we never had to do that. And as soon as we do go back, we'll automatically have an audience there. So even if we're gassed after a few minutes, you know for a fact you can't just lie there with an audience there. So that crowd are going to get you through it one way or another.
Absolutely. Because again, I look at, let's say, watching Impact versus, let's say, watching AEW. And AEW, again, they're not having 10,000 fans, but at least you see several hundred fans. And their last pay-per-view had 1,300 people. And 1,300 people, you say to yourself, well, that's not that bad. You can hear a crowd. You can feed off that. I mean, even WWE with the Thunderdome, I don't think the Thunderdome is the same as what we saw at WrestleMania. So I think in a lot of ways, I would rather wrestle in front of that audience rather than not, because I just think how difficult that is. I was even hearing Bully Ray talk about this on the radio about a month ago, and he said that he doesn't want to go back in the ring until there's an audience because he thinks it's very difficult and it almost cheapens himself. It's just not the same. So I kind of think in a lot of ways, as crazy as it sounds, I would rather you go back in the ring and have some type of audience. Obviously, we wish it wasn't over a year. I mean, if you think about it, it'll wound up being over a year since you've last been in the ring. I mean, listen, nobody thought at the very beginning of this, we would wind up being probably 16, 17 months before we'd have some normalcy. So the fact that we've waited this long, obviously the anticipation builds. But I want to talk about that then. Your last match, which was now over a year ago, and it was actually, I would have to say, it was probably the best match that you've had so far, because in that match, I think you really showcased the kind of wrestler that we're going to see and why they call you the asset Stephen Cross, because everything you explained to our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, you did that and some. So I really think that match, if there was a way to go out until we get back into the ring, that was the way to go out, because you pretty much did everything that you described for us here and the kind of wrestler that you are. So talk to me about your memories of that match and how much have you thought about that match since you were in the ring?
Yeah, I love that match. It had a good 3-month build to it with interference in other matches. I had to cut a live promo, which I did for the first time. I think it was the month before the match we had. And it was built as a big grudge match, personal issues, one-on-one, hatred there, big match feel, main event. That's the kind of thing I really like. And then when it came to the match itself, yeah, I think it's the best match I've ever had, or so far anyway. It was great. It's the one-on-one singles grudge match, as I say. And then towards the end, you got all your wrestling shenanigans and outside interference and referee turnbuckles being exposed, the referee's back being turned. It was great. I loved it.
That's the kind of match that we can expect later on this year from the asset Stephen Cross?
I do hope so, yes.
Well, one of the reasons why I think that you're going to have even better matches in 2021 is because of the shape that you have put yourself in. I mean, you've definitely kept active in 2020. That's why we said you still had a big 2020 going into 2021, because you have gotten into bodybuilding and you've done that and some. And there's somebody else that I know that that we'll talk about that's gotten into bodybuilding, and they look like a totally different person than they did even before the pandemic. But bodybuilding, I think, has put you in the condition that you're ready to go and is going to have a big year. And that's why they call you the asset Stephen Cross. But talk about bodybuilding and how you've used that to be able to get you through this and get ready for the big 2021 for your return in the ring.
Yeah, it's kept me sane, to be brutally honest. I mean, when we've had these lockdowns for months on end, then at least when you're sat in the house, if you know you've got your workout to look forward to. I mean, the workouts themselves, being honest, it's not the same as being in a gym or lifting weights or anything. But using my resistance bands and body weight stuff, that's the only equipment I had really. But each day, it's something to look forward to and focus your day around. So other than going to work, obviously, just having that to look forward to every day has just got me through it, to be honest. And yeah, as you mentioned, I've actually competed in bodybuilding in the past. So I've got that background of having quite a good knowledge of diet. So if I was slightly less active, I wouldn't eat quite as much, or I'd change my diet slightly to make sure. Just trying to stay in as good shape as possible, to be honest, for when we come back. Because I didn't want to come back and then think, oh crap, we're back in a week. I need to suddenly get in shape. I didn't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's very important for a wrestler versus another sport. Again, going back to even football or going back to even basketball, where I think you can just listen, okay, I can go out and go to a park, I can shoot a basketball, I can find a hoop somewhere, or I can kick a football. I can do that anywhere. But as a professional wrestler, it's just, there's so much that it entails to it. It's about weight training. It's about eating a certain way. It's about maybe exercising a certain way. You have to get yourself to be able to be in a condition. Listen, any other sport, right? They can take a couple of months off and they can go to their team's facility, or if they're a big name, they probably have a mansion that's got a gym and they've got a court and everything else that you want to throw in there, and they can hire a personal trainer and they'll be back in condition in no time. But as a professional wrestler, in a lot of ways, you have to be your own personal trainer. I mean, there's just so much that entails into that. I mean, is that something that concerned you during the pandemic, that as a professional wrestler that you have to keep yourself in condition at all times, and you almost get lazy in the sense that there's nothing to look forward to mentally? There's no match. Mentally, there's no feud. There's no company that's looking at you and watching your matches and watching your moves. I mean, how difficult was that actually to be able to keep yourself in the condition that you're in right now?
It has been difficult, but at the same time, because I've done it for so long, it's quite habitual to me. I'd never missed the gym before I wrestled, and obviously that's even more important now. So with lockdown, like you say, there was some days where you're thinking, not only am I not feeling this workout, but what am I actually doing it for? But I'm so in the habit of doing it now that it was far more of a rarity for me to not do it than it was to say, oh, come on, just get it done. But yeah, the motivation wasn't really there a lot of the times, I'll be honest. But I can understand people that didn't bother. I really can. But sometimes you've just got to get it done. Quit moaning and get it done.
Well, you definitely did it and some, and you definitely got the job done. That's why they call you the asset Stephen Cross. But speaking of people that we know that are bodybuilders and have a physique that's very similar to yours, and they've obviously come on the show, you know them very well, and they've become very good friends over the past several weeks. And that's the team of Synergy. And that's a team that, again, I mean, they look like they're straight out of Central Casting when it comes to the next Steiner brothers. And we've even compared Barnum and Daniels to the next Steiner brothers. I mean, you have some experience with them. You know them very well. I mean, talk to me about what Synergy is like, and if you're ever wondering if you have to compete with Barnum and everything he's doing, because Ryan Barnum is doing a lot when it comes to bodybuilding. And again, he looks like he just does it and it's just easy. I mean, he's lifting like 5,000 pounds over his head. And you're saying to yourself, how is this guy doing it? Is he a robot? Is he real? I mean, talk to me about Synergy.
Yeah, I love Synergy. I'm actually quite good friends with Ryan, so I've told him this on numerous occasions that, like, from a fan point of view, I would pay to watch those pair. But my first day of training in July 2017, they both started out on the same day as me. Ryan was actually the first person to talk to me. I think we all walked into the room and we were waiting around for the coach to come in and we're waiting to start. And a few people were talking, but you could tell the room was just filled with nerves. They're all dead nervous. Anyway, for whatever reason, nobody approached me, maybe kept myself away. I don't know. And then Ryan was the first person to come over and he said something along the lines of, oh, you was nervous as me? And I was like, yeah. and then straight away, he obviously both mentioned we were both in half decent shape. So he said, oh, you must train. And then we spoke about that. So I spoke to him straight away. But Troy, Ryan and Anderson Daniels. They both, I believe, that they actually knew each other from the past and didn't know they were going to be there on the same day. But it was obvious early doors they were going to do well because they're both big, which obviously makes someone stand out. But then as soon as you're in there watching them train and it's your first few weeks and you see people picking things up really well and you can see they're athletic, it's obvious that they're going to go on to do well. And then they've just done better and better. They're doing great things. I love them as a team. I love watching them. Both good lads as well, Chris and Ryan. Love the pair of them, but they're doing really well. And they've got all sorts of facets to the game as well. They work heel, they can work face, they can bring comedy in if they want, or they can just be the big monster heels that are going to batter you as well. So I think they've got everything.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's what strikes me about them is that there's some teams and you look at them and they say, okay, those guys, they're just straight up heels, just badasses. You don't want to get in their way. Just let them do what they're doing. With them, with Synergy, what I like about Synergy is that they're very versatile. They have the comedic side, but then they have the straight-laced, listen, if you're in the ring with them, expect 10 minutes of hell, 10 minutes of punishment, 10 minutes of pain. So I think that that's why they're going to go on to bigger and better things. And I know we talked about that when we had them on the show and their background, because obviously with Barton being a football player, an American football player, and Anderson's background, they almost pretty much knew each other without even knowing each other. Exactly what you said. It was a very interesting dynamic. And I just can't picture them not being a team together at this point, especially with their background. And somebody else that I know that you've trained with, and I really think he's somebody that should just stay as a heel, because he is somebody that I think is one of the best heels in the business. And I think he's going to go on have a banner 2021. Everybody needs to get his new shirt. And that is the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn. And we had him on not too long ago. We've actually spoken with him a couple of different times on social media when it comes to some of the clips that we've had with him and RP Davis, who came on the show a little while ago, the natural born fighter RP Davis. But I know you have some experience in training with the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn. So for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, I mean, talk about the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn and what's it like training with him?
I've actually only got to train with Isaiah Quinn once. It was at a Dave Taylor training seminar and I'd never met him before then. Didn't know anything about him. I got to get in the ring that everybody got to mix together and run different spots with each other. I only got to get in with him once, but you could tell straight away that he was talented and he seemed a good guy as well. Like when you go through the formalities in wrestling and shaking everyone's hand, you can tell the people you introduce yourself to, you can tell the ones that are genuine and want to actually speak to you and the ones that are just doing it because they're meant to do it kind of thing. He seemed a genuine guy. So obviously after that, I followed him on all the social medias and everything. I think the way he promotes himself and the promos he films and everything are absolutely unreal. I think he's so entertaining. And like you say, that character and everything he's got and being a heel, I think he's brilliant. I love the way he promotes himself on social media. I think a lot of us can learn from it.
Oh, absolutely. I was watching one of his matches a few weeks ago, and what struck me most about it was he didn't get into the ring for about 3 minutes, and I actually timed it. And he had the entire crowd hating him without even getting into the ring. I mean, that's somebody that knows what he's doing. That's somebody that knows the crowd. And that's somebody that I think we're going to see him not just being Odyssey Pro Wrestling. We're going to see him one of these days in Progress or NXT UK, just like our guest here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, and he's our asset. And that's Steven Crow. As I am America's greatest export, the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And for more information on the Sports Report, you can go to sportsreportx.com. And to listen to all of our archives, you can go to soundcloud.com/the Sports Report 2019 and subscribe to our YouTube page now at the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, where you can see Sports Report related content from a who's who of people that have come on the show recently. And as always, a huge shout out to the entire team here at Sportinarium, including Lakey, Arv, last week's guest, Sean, who does a phenomenal job with the Sportinarium TV YouTube page. Richie, who does a phenomenal job for us in promoting the brand. Also, Steve, huge shout out to Steve, who also hosts the Eagles Nest show here. Connor, Martin, Ryan, our friend Mike Lipinski, Susie, Sasha, everybody at Sportinarium that has made us the #1 global sports show. In fact, there's so many people at Sportinarium we have to thank that I almost forget who to thank and who's who. But obviously, most importantly, you want to follow Sportinarium on Twitter and Instagram at Sportinarium. You can like Sportinarium on Sportinarium at Sportinarium Media. You can subscribe to the aforementioned Sportinarium YouTube page at Sportinarium TV. And you can also listen to the Sports Report on Sportinarium.com Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. UK time. Fridays to Sundays from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. UK time on Sportinarium.com, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can listen to not just the Sports Report, but a who's who of great shows here on Sportinarium. And there is so many of them. The In the Fight show with Mike Lipinski, Women's Fight News with Susie and Sasha, The Spartan Show with Arvin Lakey. You've got Sportinarium Music. You've got Sean's Mix. You also got to give a huge shout out to DJ Dale with the DJ Slippy Show, which comes on right before us. DJ Addy, which we cut up a promo for his Sunday chill out sessions on Sundays. I mean, there are so many great shows here. All you have to do is keep it dialed in, keep it locked in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to Sportinarium.com, and you can find the Sports Report Fridays to Sundays. And also next week, we have our first fight that we're helping promote with Assassins Promotions, the Lionesses fight, which you can catch on Fight TV for free. That's right, for free. Fight TV next Saturday, the Lionesses event, and we're going to have on next week 2 fighters who are going to appear on that. Then last week's guest, ladies and gentlemen, was Nicola the Hurricane Hopewell, and she's fighting on the card against Lucille Winter. So we cannot wait for that. You know that we are going to be talking a lot about that next week on the show. We are going to be watching that fight. We are locked in. We are ready to go for 7:30 p.m. when it comes to Fight TV, the Lionesses. We cannot wait for that. It is going to be a fight. It is going to be one for the ages. If you thought the Ebony Bridges Shannon Courtney fight was good, you just wait till you see Holly Tal in the ring and Ellie Colson and Nicola the Hurricane Hopewell. You just wait till you see these ladies in the ring, and I guarantee you it's going to be worth it. So go on over to Fight TV next Saturday, and all you have to do is sign up for free and stream it. We cannot wait to be talking about that fight once again next week here on the Sports Report, just as we're excited to be talking with our guest here, and that is the asset Stephen Cross, who has in a very short amount of time established himself as one of the premier technical wrestlers in the business. He is on his way to bigger and better things, and we are extremely honored and excited to have had the opportunity to speak with him here on the Sports Report on Sportinarium, the #1 global radio station. And the asset Stephen Cross, you just mentioned it before, and that was Dave Taylor. I remember watching Dave Taylor as a kid in WCW, on WCW Saturday night mostly, and he was probably one of the toughest wrestlers I've ever seen in the ring. I mean, we talk about Brock Lesnar, we talk about Bobby Lashley, we talk about Ken Shamrock to an extent. You want to throw in there Sheamus, you want to throw in there Drew McIntyre, fine by me. But Dave Taylor, straight up, you got into a fight with him. I don't think you're getting out of that alive. I mean, you got to talk to us about that experience of training with the legendary Dave Taylor.
Yeah, he's a big guy as well. He's bigger than you realise. Yeah, it was a great experience. It came about really randomly. I was best man at my friend's wedding. So obviously I'd had a few beers, or more than a few. And I got a message really late at night saying, do you want to train with Dave Taylor tomorrow? And I was like, the Dave Taylor? And they were like, yeah. My first thought was, oh no, I'm going to be hungover to hell tomorrow. So obviously straight away I was like, yeah, of course I do. I was there, turned up with a bad hangover, full of nerves, didn't know anybody there other than Troy Ryan was there, so I knew him luckily. But yeah, it was brilliant. It was good to just a completely different insight. Like, you could tell how different it was and how old school he was compared to maybe a lot of other people that'll train you nowadays. A lot of the things he was saying, You could tell he'd come from WWE, and it was very WWE orientated. Like, it taught you through something, and then it'd be like, oh, WWE look for this, or they're only interested in this kind of thing. But yeah, it was good. As I said, it was different. It was a very different psychology to what would normally be used to, I'd say, with certain aspects. And a lot of the sequences we ran are not things you'd necessarily run before, or things that even the more experienced guys there had necessarily done before. So it was great. It was all experiences like that are always brilliant to learn off guys like that. Been to a seminar before now with Jay Lethal, and some of the things you learn off these guys, it's invaluable what you can learn off them. It really is.
See, I think that that's really important, especially here in the UK, because here in the States, it's like, well, everybody is a wrestler. Everybody you could find in your neighborhood or in your town. I mean, we even have a contact that came on the show over a year ago before we even started professional wrestling, covering it here on Sportinarium, and even before we were on Sportinarium. And that was a guy, Mike Taverna, who was on AEW. And we had a contact with him because he was a local baseball coach here for a college. And we didn't even talk wrestling with him, more or less. So, but the point is, everybody here in New York, New Jersey, across the country, you can find somebody who's a professional wrestler. To me, it's not as big a deal as I think it is in the UK here. And I think that that's why I think we like the wrestling scene more in the UK than we like it more in the States, just because kind of the feel that we get with you guys. There's something special going on here. There's something different. And speaking of people that you learned, I am sure, quite a bit from, and I know that you were on that Zoom call not too long ago with Chris Brooker. We're going to talk about Chris Brooker in a minute, but you were on that call, I know, with the legendary Lance Storm. And Lance Storm, you want to talk about guys that are technical wrestlers, and I would say for about a 2 or 3 year period, might have been one of the best wrestlers in the business. Here was a guy that won, I lost count on how many titles in ECW and WCW, and even the WWE with Christian. He was a really good tag team wrestler with him for a while, won a couple of tag team titles there, and he really established himself. Like I said, from about 98 to 2000, he was probably one of my top 3 or 4 favorite wrestlers, especially his tag team with Just Incredible, the Impact Players. They were my favorite tag team in ECW. I still remember having tapes somewhere where I taped matches of Just Incredible and Lance Storm in the ring. So you got to talk about that then for us, especially for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium. What did you learn from Lance Storm and being on that Zoom call with him a few months ago?
Yeah, it was incredible. It really was. Like yourself, I loved the Impact Players. I was always a big Lance Storm fan. As I said earlier, I've always loved the tickle guys. I always liked Lance Storm. I was always a big fan of his. He's got a great look as well. Not only could he wrestle, and he could do high flying stuff as well if he wanted. Yeah, I was a big fan of his. When Chris Brooker gave us the opportunity to go on this Zoom call with him, obviously I jumped at the chance. Just not only the wrestler in me and the invaluable feedback and everything you get, but just the fan side of me as well. So that was a little surreal, but it was brilliant. I could honestly, for someone that criticised for not being a good talker in his career, I could have listened to him talk and give analysis of people's matches all day. The detail he went into and the intricacies and everything, it was such a fine level of detail about everything. Like, it was actually a Synergy match that he was giving feedback on, and Synergy versus the Young Guns at a Future Shock show, and it was a hell of a match. And he said that initially, and then he said straight away to the guys in it, don't be downhearted, because it's going to sound like it's all criticism. But the reason he was saying that is because he went into such detail on every little facet of the match, which was why it came across like it might have been a constant criticism, but it wasn't. It was like, even when something was brilliant, it's like, oh, you could do this and make it even better. The detail he went into, it was great. And then he gave us a lot of information as well, just on certain behaviours and do's and don'ts, whether you're a babyface or a heel. It was invaluable. I think everyone that was in it would have said that, and everyone that was on the call could say that they'd take at least a handful of things away from it. It was brilliant. It really was.
That's one of those once in a lifetime type of experiences where you just have to soak it all in and just not say anything, just let him talk. Because Lance Storm, I mean, his background is legendary. I mean, he even trained in the dungeon, the Hart Dungeon. So, I mean, you're a big Bret Hart guy, the asset Stephen Cross, and Lance Storm's a guy that he knows the Hart family. Maybe he doesn't know Bret as well as, let's say, a Jericho or a Benoit did, but he still has that connection. He knows what it's like. So you want to talk about wrestlers that understand what to do in this business to get ahead and be successful. Lance Storm is as good as anybody. And I always thought that he had got a raw deal when it came to his mic skills. I think that they tried to change him and was the whole thing. He was serious and he wasn't serious. But when they let him go in ECW, I mean, if he would have stayed there, he probably would have been the world champion. But you have to make money in ECW. That's just kind of how it went. But speaking of Chris Brooker, and I know that we've talked with a lot of guys about Chris Brooker, and here's a guy that can help you when it comes to your mic skills. Here's a guy who really helps you get into your character. And he's been a guy that's been so valuable to so many people. And we've talked about him when it comes to the guiding light, Isaiah Quinn, Synergy, obviously, the Cumbrian outlaw, Rick Marcus, the natural born fighter, RP Davis, who just came on the show. And he's meant a lot, I know, to those guys' careers in terms of learning their character and promoting themselves. And for you, give us what Chris Brooker has said to you and what he's meant to you so far in your career.
Unfortunately, I've only ever actually met Chris on a handful of occasions. And it's always been one of those deals where we're leaving training, our class is finished, and then he's coming in for the class at the end of the night, or he's coming in to set up his promo class or something like that. It's only ever been a handful of occasions in person. Obviously, I know he was Future Shock owner for a long time, and Future Shock did great things whilst he was the owner. But more and more, we're getting to interact with him because, like on our Future Shock Facebook group and everything, he's reaching out for his promo classes. And then sometimes he'll just throw a promo that's been on TV or an old promo or other matches, older matches or whatever, for us to look at that he thinks would be valuable in us learning and everything. So even though I haven't seen him a great deal in person, he's already having a direct influence on me. And cutting promos is something that I've not done a great deal of, but I actually feel really comfortable doing. And so I actually want to take one of his promo classes because every single person I've seen that took one has said nothing but brilliant things about it. That varies from inexperienced people, experienced people, people that love cutting promos and thought they were already good at it, have said they've learned how they can improve. People that are really not confident doing them have said how much more confident they are after they've had one of his classes. So it's definitely something I'm going to do in the coming weeks for sure.
Absolutely. And listen, doing those promos are extremely important. And listen, Bret Hart was not a big promo guy. And he had to train himself to be able to get in front of that camera, to get in front of the mic, and to be able to speak. So you have great wrestling skills, but those promo skills are going to help you go even further. And that's why we know that you are going to have a huge 2021 and beyond, because you are going to master the mic skills just like you have done in the ring. And speaking of those who have mastered and dominated the mic, I got to ask you about this because you want to talk about once in a lifetime moments. And I'm sure you get asked about this quite a bit, but I understand last year you got to have a conversation with Mr. Todd Smith, otherwise known as LL Cool J. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's versatile. You want to talk about somebody who's probably one of the best actors around. And most notably, he's arguably one of the greatest MCs of all time, one of the greatest rappers. And he's such a great rapper and such a great artist that's such respected that he even has his own station now on Sirius XM called Rock the Bells. So, I mean, that's a bucket list moment. I mean, listen, we feel like we're speaking to LL Cool J now that we're talking with the asset Stephen Cross. So, you know, for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, we got to ask you, talk to us about what that was like in speaking with Mr. Todd Smith, otherwise known as LL Cool J.
Oh, it was amazing. It was so surreal and it just came out of nowhere. It was so random. LL Cool J, to me, like I grew up listening to classic hip hop, which is really weird for a white guy from a small city in the UK. That's really, really rare. There was like me, a brother, and another pair of brothers in our high school, and everyone thought we were strange. And then 5 years later, hip hop took off massively in England, and everyone was on the bandwagon then, which was a bit annoying. But yeah, LL Cool J for me, I think he's my personal all-time number one rapper. Calls himself the GOAT, in my opinion, rightfully so. But basically, I just finished training at home. I just finished doing a home workout, and I was just lying on my bed, chilling out, and on Instagram, out of habit, as you do, Instagram Live. As I said to you earlier, I'm not very good with technology, so I didn't even know what I was doing. But I went on Instagram Live, and he had one of his tracks playing. So because it was a good track, naturally, you're listening to it and playing along, and he's talking into the camera. And I'm not paying a great deal of attention. It's just kind of there as you do when you're zoned out looking at your phone. And next minute, he started saying, "Oh, let's see who, like, you know, who's in the house, like what countries." So I don't even know what made me do it. So I just put the English England flag in the comments. Next minute, I get this notification saying LL Cool J wants you to join his video call or join his Instagram live. And I still didn't know what that meant. So I said, okay. So I was just lying down on my bed, and then next minute, the screen splits and it's me at the top and him at the bottom. And he says hello. And I just pull this confused face like he can't be talking to me. So I'm like, hello? And then he responded to me. He's like, yeah, you're good. And I was like, and that's when I was like, oh, damn, I'm speaking to him. It just took me by surprise. And before you knew it, I was having a conversation with my all-time heroes, LL Cool J. It was unreal. Yeah, he seemed really genuine as well. Like, obviously, I carried on watching the call and the other fans he spoke to afterwards. And he just basically, because everyone was in lockdown, he just decided, why not reach out to the fans and the average person? He just talk what anyone wanted to talk about. And then that was one of the very first times he did it when I was on. And then he did it for months afterwards whilst we were in lockdown. He used to go on every night and just reach out to your average person and reach out to fans and just talk. But he seemed like genuinely happy and interested to do it, which was cool. It was a great experience.
I'm sure that was a great experience. And you got to get him to cut a track for you. Now, you want to come out to some ring music. I mean, LL Cool J can definitely cut you a track. And speaking of the GOAT, he even has a song called Rockin' with the GOAT on one of his albums, Exit 13. So LL Cool J, I mean, listen, you want to talk about rappers, you want to talk about artists. I mean, he's really only one of a handful of artists that you could say that stands the test of time, and that he was successful in the 80s, he was successful in the 90s, he was successful in the 2000s, and he was successful today. In fact, he's such a respected artist that he even has a song where Eddie Van Halen, the late great Eddie Van Halen, plays guitar on it, and then Richie Sambora, who was of Bon Jovi, plays with LL Cool J on a song. So think about the respect that LL Cool J demands in the fact that he has a song where Eddie Van Halen performs on it and Richie Sambora performs on it. So listen, give me your favorite LL Cool J song or two.
Oh, there's many. The obvious ones, Mama Said Knock You Out. There's so many. This is difficult. I'm actually going to bring him up on Spotify now and try and listen to LL Cool J on almost a daily basis.
I'm going to give you a couple of under the radar ones. I'm going to give you a couple of under the radar runs, which I think you'll wind up listening to. One is No Frontin' Allowed, and it's No Frontin' Allowed, and the other one is Buck 'Em Down. Those are the ones that I think you'll actually find that those songs, you'll find those will be very aggressive songs. Those will be songs that you'll probably say, why did he say that instead of not Rock the Bells or Baby Phenomenon or anything else like that? No, those are two songs that I think in a way kind of under the radar, I think describes LL Cool J and kind of the versatility that he has as an artist. So check out those songs, because I think you'll come back to me and you'll DM me, and I'm sure you'll say, well, those were actually pretty good choices. I have to say those were good choices. So obviously we know that
Buck 'Em Down is actually one of my favorites. It's on 14 Shots of the Dome. I think it's the second track.
That was the
album.
That's
actually an album that was criticized, I think, really underrated.
Yep, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was an album that you probably look at now, maybe gets a second look. But when it came out, it was kind of probably at a weird time in his career. And he was coming off all that success of Mama Said Knock You Out and all those different success where you'd seen him as more of a pop artist, more of somebody that you'd seen in the flashy videos. But at the time the album came out, it was kind of like, it was sort of like a middle ground. But in a way, it was kind of the bridge to the second half of his career, where Loungin' and all those other songs that would later on to bring him into a second wind and lead him to being the star that we see him now on NCIS and everywhere else. And that's why we're honored to have a few more minutes with the asset Stephen Cross, because he has definitely shown us that he is the asset. We're extremely excited about the future of his wrestling career. We're honored to talk about his journey, as I am America's greatest export, the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and we are here on Sportinarium, the #1 global radio station, talking for a few more minutes with the asset Stephen Cross. And the asset Stephen Cross, before we get your closing thoughts and ask you about one or two moments that stand out most in your career already, speaking about bucket list moments, you got to talk to us about very quickly going to WrestleMania 34 and what that experience was like.
Oh, it's a hell of an experience to go to any WrestleMania. And a couple of my friends actually went to the two before as well, 32, 33 and 34, I think it was. We did 3 in a row. I'd recommend any any fan, any wrestler, anybody to go to them. Obviously vary depending on which city it's in and the setup. Some of them will involve more travel between like your stadium for WrestleMania and your arena for NXT and the Hall of Fame and stuff. But it's brilliant wherever you go. It's an unreal spectacle. It really is. I don't think you appreciate it fully until you're there. Obviously, it's important whether it's a good card and what the matches are, but it's a different kettle of fish to actually be at the events. There's such an atmosphere around whatever city you're in. There's wrestling fans everywhere. I can only imagine how much it brings into the city's economy, whichever city's hosting it. It's a brilliant experience, all of them were.
It's almost like Woodstock. It's like the Super Bowl. It's like all these different events packed into one, because WrestleMania, it's not just a day anymore. I mean, I remember as a kid, we're probably about the same age, that WrestleMania, it was like, okay, it was a couple of days. But then I kind of think, and we were talking about this with Brice and Rogan, and we were talking about this, I think, even with Synergy. I think since WrestleMania 17, I think each WrestleMania, obviously before last year, it was almost like you would get bigger and bigger, just almost as if you have to be there for like a week, not even just for a couple of days. I mean, my brothers went to WrestleMania 30 when that was at MetLife Stadium, and WrestleMania 20, which was here at Madison Square Garden, but there's just something different about it. I almost think that with WrestleMania, it's not like anything else. I almost, at this point, the asset Stephen Cross, I look forward to WrestleMania more than anything else. So that's definitely once in a lifetime experience. Well, of course, until naturally we see you wrestling at WrestleMania, until naturally the WWE signs you here in a couple of years here very quickly, maybe even by next year they sign you, and we get to see you in WrestleMania wrestling in the main event and hopefully taking either the Universal or the WWE title. And very quickly, I got to ask you then, what was your thoughts on the outcome of WrestleMania 37? Did you like the 2-day experience? I mean, talk to me very quick on what you thought about WrestleMania 37.
I've only actually currently seen night one and then all the spoilers from night two. I can understand the 2-night thing based on obviously the current circumstances and everything. Whether it'll work going forward, I'm not too sure. If there is a criticism of actually being at a WrestleMania, only criticism would be a couple of the shows we were at ended up lasting over 7 hours, including the pre-show. And that's not including waiting around outside the stadium and in Orlando, standing around under the baking hot sun, which a Brit is not used to. So that's hard going. Whether it's something they're planning to do moving forward, because rather than have shows of that length, I'm not sure. I mean, it's WWE. I'm sure they'll make it work somehow. And at the end of the day, people are going to pay and go to both nights anyway. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they stick with that format moving forward.
Yeah, that was a big complaint that we heard actually about the last WrestleMania that they had at MetLife Stadium a few years back, where a number of people had complained because New Jersey Transit and the transportation was very poor. And a lot of people were actually stranded. They didn't get home, if I recall correctly. It was actually a big talk on Sports Talk Radio here, of all places, in the New York area. People didn't get home until maybe 3-4 o'clock in the morning the next day because of how bad New Jersey Transit, in terms of the Port Authority, handled the whole situation with transportation. So I could certainly sympathize with that being an issue, being a 7-8 hour day. I mean, I know it's a once in a lifetime moment, a once in a lifetime experience, but people have to work the next day. People have lives. So, unless you have a lot of money to shell out, you can stay in a hotel. But even then, I think it becomes very much an issue that you have to think about. That's why, believe it or not, I've never been a big guy that likes to go to these events. I do like sporting events, obviously, going to them, but I've always thought about that and saying I don't want to get stuck somewhere for 7 or 8 hours. So I could certainly sympathize with that. So I could even imagine with this year's WrestleMania, with the rain delay, and obviously nobody foreseen what was going to happen with the pandemic, and the fact that people, I'm sure, probably didn't get home until 3-4 o'clock in the morning. The only advantage was it was Saturday night, but still you have to get to work, you have a life, you have a family. So those are certainly things I could certainly sympathize with and see why that could be an issue. And then before we get your closing thoughts here, and I know that you have a lot of moments that stand out most in your career so far. That's why they call you the asset Stephen Cross. But for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, is there 1 or 2 moments that stand out most in your career so far?
Yeah, I would say one of them was a debut match. Obviously, when you're training every week towards something, then it's the culmination of all your hard work, which is about 18 months of training. So obviously that match means everything to you. Not only the fact, obviously, it's a lifelong dream to be a wrestler, but it's the fact that it went so well. Well, obviously, you feel you're not ready. No matter how ready you are, you're always going to think, oh, I'm not ready enough to have this match. I was also lucky enough to work with someone that's actually a good friend of mine now as well. It's called Wildfire Nate Brice. During COVID, when we're training, we've only been allowed to train train with one partner. So I actually train with him at the moment, and I've just learned so much from him, and he's helped me a great deal with all sorts of different aspects of in-ring stuff. But that match, my debut, getting to work with someone as experienced as him and as talented as him, obviously is going to help a rookie debutant in any circumstances, and he helped me massively in that match. Yeah, I would say that one. And another one that stands out, actually, is a match I had against a guy called Nathan Gunn, just because it was the first time that I was the more experienced worker of the two. So it just felt a completely different experience. I really loved that match because I felt a lot more that, like, I wasn't being carried, and I was going to have to, like, hold up my own end of the bargain and maybe even have moments where I'd have to help out because I was the more experienced one. So I really enjoyed that, and that was one of the best matches I've had. And possibly the first live promo I got to cut as well. I loved that. I wasn't sure how I'd feel doing that, and then when I got out there, it felt great. I loved it. I loved being horrible on the microphone and hearing everyone react negatively to you. So good. It's great. Know how comfortable it is.
Well, listen, we got a very good feeling that you are going to be doing many more great promos. And we know that you are going to have many, many great matches, because we know that 2021 is going to be a banner year for the asset Stephen Cross, and a rising tide lifts all boats. And we know that the asset Stephen Cross is going to be that rising tide that is going to lift us. And if you are a professional wrestling company right now in the UK, you were getting ready to start up, and you want somebody that's going to be an asset to your company, you want somebody that can do it in the ring, do it outside the ring, the asset Stephen Cross is that perfect person for your company to build around, because Cesaro, Kurt Angle, Bret the Hitman Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kenny Omega, Bobby Lashley, Brock Lesnar, Drew McIntyre, you name them, they have nothing on the asset Stephen Cross. So he is going to have a huge 2021. We cannot wait to be a part of that. We cannot wait to talk about his upcoming matches and all the great things that he is going to do here. And for you, my friend, I want to give you the floor. I want to give any closing thoughts. I also want you to plug where all of our listeners can keep up to date with all the great things that the asset Stephen Cross is going to do. And it's been a tremendous honor to speak with you, and I cannot thank you enough. I am looking forward to the future of the asset Stephen Cross and all the great things that you are going to do. And I'm sure you'll meet another great celebrity. I'm sure you'll speak with another great wrestler by the time we have you back on the show next. And I can't thank you enough, my friends. So I want to give you the floor. Any closing thoughts? Also plug all of your social media, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, so we can keep up to date with the journey that you're going to be on. So the floor is yours, and can't thank you enough.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I can't thank you enough for having me on. The Sports Report tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant. Hopefully we'll be able to do it again down the line. Closing thoughts. I just can't wait for wrestling to get back. Hopefully everyone's going to be safe first and foremost. Hopefully everyone's going to have fun, and everyone's just going to appreciate fans, wrestlers, backstage people. I hope everyone's going to take it in and appreciate it a little more, as we've gone so long without it. So yeah, just looking forward to the future. Optimistic. For social media, you can find me on Twitter at theasset1169 and on Instagram at SparkyS316, and that's where you can find me on social media. And just want to say thanks again, Tom, for having me on the Sports Report tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant, mate.
Oh, absolutely, my friend. And we'll be happy to bring you back on anytime you want to talk about anything in the world of professional wrestling, anything that's on your mind. If you want to talk even some LL Cool J, if you want to talk some Lance Storm, some Bret Hart, you're a very versatile guy. And I think that you're a guy that would be great for radio. So anything that you ever want to share on your mind for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportinarium, the floor will always be yours. And a rising tide lifts all boats. And we know that you are definitely going to be that rising tide. And frankly, you could probably lift the boat by yourself just on how strong you are. So you literally are a rising tide. So, I mean, the definition of that. So obviously, though, I can't thank you enough. I'm looking forward to the future of your career and all the great things that you're going to do. And I look forward to speaking with you soon, and can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with our #1 asset, and that is the asset Stephen As I am America's greatest export, the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned for some brand new music from two-time Sports Report guest, the legendary Olivier Laurent, one of the top MCs in his own right, and his music is going to taste like butter. It's going to sound like butter, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that, plus some brand new music from those very frantic like Frantics and the legendary Joe Dell to close out the show, as we were just with one of the top wrestlers around in the UK. That's the asset Stephen Cross. So stay tuned for brand new music here on the Sports Report on Sportinarium, the #1 global radio station of the legendary Olivier Laurent and the Frantics, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. So stay tuned for brand new music from the legendary Olivier Laurent, then those Frantics, and the legendary Joe Dell, as we hear on Sportinarium, the #1 global radio station.